Hey guys, welcome back to Kerbal Space Program with Nitro. I decided to actually do a mission back to Moho and land and then take off again with the Papa Dragon that now has some improvements to it. So hopefully this time we'll be able to make it all the way there and all the way back within one mission so I don't have to send a big rescue party again. The reason for this is I didn't record the original landing on Moho, and I do want to land at a different landing site this time. And I also want to test out the improvements I made to the Papa Dragon. So now I think it'll be able to make it off the surface. I put the ion engines back on the bottom here that I originally had on here before, and I gave this thing some more fuel. And then I also changed the propulsion system on the lander pod, which is this whole piece right here. And I gave this thing a bigger transfer stage. So what's going to happen is this whole thing is going to get up into space, all in well, pretty much one piece. What I'm going to do is I'm going to jettison these outer large double towers here and all of the solid boosters, but the entire rest of this whole craft is going to go up into orbit as all one massive piece, and then I'm going to refuel the whole thing and then send it out to Moho with all this extra fuel on here. So it's quite a bit of fuel, but hopefully that'll solve our problem and I can be a lot more efficient with the fuel in this thing. So this is really quite the craft. So let's set up our crew. I'm not going to use Bill and Bob for this particular mission. I am going to use a couple of new guys that I hired on. Where are they? Here he is. Alright, so we're going to have Gus, Macdon, and Gerzor. That is our team, and we only need 3 of them because 2 of them are going to stay in the main ship and 1 guy is going to go into the lander. So let's get this going. Now I'm only going to show you 1 refuel with this craft to save time, and then I'm going to have to do several refueling missions up there because there's no way I can get the amount of fuel I need up there in 1 mission. So I'm going to have to do a lot of this off camera. And I do want to carry along some spare tanks. And I'll show you guys the spare tank setup I got too. It's basically just one of these large tanks here with some extra RCS on it that we're just going to attach onto the top, and we're going to have 2 of those, and that's going to be spare fuel for the nuke engines for when we get out further and we drop all of this extra stuff down below. Alright, so here we go. And yes, when that separation happens, I do lose pretty much all audio until later. So it's just lagging really bad whenever you separate that many things all at once. But we'll be okay. Alright, so 100,000 meters is good enough for what we need to do. No need to waste fuel. So I'm going to try to get a 100,000 meter orbit around Kerbin, and then I'm going to align it with the moon just to make sure it's nice and even. And then I'll send up the refueling craft once for you guys so you can see the refuel process, and then I will send up the attachment stage after I've finished refueling absolutely everything that needs to be refueled. Um, Real quick, one thing to notice, I am going to put the ship up for download in the descriptions below. One of the things you absolutely have to do is go up here and disable the fuel cross feed, because if you don't, it's going to use fuel from this little tank right here, and we don't want that to happen because we're going to need that for our lander, and you might forget that you're using it later. And then I also like to disable these monopropellant tanks on the sides of our lander because I don't want to have to refuel monopropellant too. You can use monopropellant to help yourself with your maneuvers because this thing's like trying to pilot the Titanic in space, and it doesn't really work that well if you're not using RCS. So just use RCS from this main tank. It's got 750, and that's more than enough for anything that you'll need. And then once we reach our, let's see, About 30 seconds before apoapsis here, we're going to start burning prograde so we can establish our orbit. So I turned RCS on just to help. I got burned now. Alright, so now I'm just going to circularize it a little bit more, and then I'm going to do the inclination burn. As you can see, we pretty much ran out all of our fuel here, so we just have these 4 outer tanks here, and then the central tank left. That central tank will have enough fuel to do all of these little maneuvers that we need to do, because we only need to do 4 meters a second. And then I think the inclination change should be no more than about 30 meters per second. So that's no problem. We're not going to have any issues with that. And then I just have to orient this craft perfect down, and then we can see some docking of supermassive payloads. Now, the whole idea for this thing is that after you get it um, refueled and everything, and you're ready to send it out, as you can see, we have fuel lines running from each and every tank inward to the central tank. Now, what that means for us is that the central tank is going to burn fuel from all these outer tanks, and we don't have to burn the outer tank engines. Now, because we're in space, this central tank is still going to be able to push this craft. And so we can run this central tank basically at max power without using any of the other tanks, and that gives us this much fuel. So we have fuel of all of these outer ones times 4 to power this one engine in the middle. And that's going to give us a lot more fuel efficiency than if we were to run all of them at the same time, because we don't really need that. And so that'll allow us to travel great distances without having to burn fuel from all the other engines. And then once one of these is depleted, then you just jettison it as you normally would, because we don't need to carry any of that extra weight anymore. So that is essentially asparagus staging, only we're going to be doing it a little differently. But it still has the same effect because we're getting the same amount of power out of this one engine, but we're just carrying less mass because we're going to be jettisoning all these tanks, starting from the outer ones and working our way in. And the ejection stages are already set up for that purpose, so you won't have any problems with that. I do want to burn this one pretty much right on the money because it's only 4 meters a second. Alright. A little bit more than what we needed, but that's fine. Let's see. 99 and 100. Perfect. That is absolutely perfect. I don't want it to be so perfect that they're jittering a whole lot because it makes it a little difficult to set up maneuvers. And you probably noticed that at some point. Wrong way. Right, so 0.0 is what we're after. I can already see the little bit of blue here on the top of my nav ball, so that's where I'm going to need to go. And we still have a little bit of fuel in those outer tanks too. And what this sliver actually means is this entire central tank is completely full, so that'll kind of mislead you as to how much fuel we're actually carrying. So we actually have a lot more fuel than what you're seeing there. Alright, that might have been a bit much. And 0.1. Good enough. Doesn't need to be perfect. We're just putting it in orbit so we can refuel it. So 98,000, 100,000, that's still good. And this is what I like to do when I dock these extra massive payloads, is I like to have it pointing either perfect normal or perfect anti-normal, or south, north-south, whichever you prefer. And so that way, when we go to dock these things, it's all I have to do is just come up straight from underneath it. I don't have to worry about any sort of changes. As long as this thing is pointed directly down, it's going to be pointing perfectly straight all the time along the entire orbital path. So we don't have to worry about anything weird happening. You can press 1 on your keyboard to deploy the solar arrays, and that'll keep everything fully charged. There are a few thermoelectric generators here on the lander, but they don't generate enough power to power all of the SAS systems that we have on here, but this is more than enough power for everything, so that's fine. And now what we need to do, before we forget, is shut down all of these engines, because when we actually go to refuel it, we're only going to want to use one engine, and that's that central one. And that's still going to give us a lot of power for this craft. And there we go. So now we only have this one engine active, and that's the only engine we're going to use for the entire remainder of our flight out to Moho, because using any of these other engines is just a waste of fuel, and we want to be as efficient as possible. Now, ideally, one of the things that I really wanted to do and try was activate these nuclear engines and then use those instead. And then Well, this is kind of another way you can look at it is if you don't use this 1500 power rocket here and you refuel this entire ship, there are 4 nuclear engines right here. And so if you decided to actually move the nuke stage, which I believe is this one right here, so in stage 4, move those engines down to another stage below stage 8 and activate them, you could use just the power of the nuclear rockets with all of this extra fuel for the entire journey, and that's a lot of fuel for nuke rockets. You won't nearly need that much for anything ever. But I want to move a little faster than what the nuke rockets could probably give me for propulsion, so that's why I'm going to use just this single 1500 power rocket up here. So alright, so this orbit is good, and now we just need to go to the Space Center and then launch our refuel ship. I have 2 different ways that you can do this. One of them is slightly more difficult than the other. I have the quick refuel craft, which is already in the download folder that I created. And then I also have a second one that I'm going to be attaching to the ship just as spare tanks. But I know what you're thinking. Why would I need more fuel if I have all that fuel up there already? Well, I'm not really sure how far we're going to be able to go with that, and the inclination change for Moho is quite a bit, so I just want to be safe and have as much fuel as possible for the journey, because it's always better to have more fuel than not enough fuel. So, right here we have our quick refuel. This is one that I put up for download. I believe I fixed the RCS on it. Sometimes it's a little hard to control. I think I put more RCS adapters on there. But I'm not sure if I did or not. It looks like I did. Yeah, so we just launched this entire thing up into space. It's completely unmanned, so you don't have to worry about that. And then you just dock it with the small docking port up here on the top. And you can refit it with a larger docking port if you have a large docking port system. So I'm going to launch this one here and do one refuel for you guys, and then I'm going to pause it, do the rest off camera, and then I'll bring you back when I have my secondary ship that's ready for docking with the craft after it's been completely refueled. Because this will take several missions. I know it looks like there's a lot of fuel that I'm going to be able to transfer on here, but there's really not. This is another one of those ones where you're going to lose audio when it ejects that stage. But that's okay. Should get audio back after I eject this next stage. Or not. Alright, so I did turn on RCS in order to counter that roll. The SAS system only helps you so much for your pitch and yaw, but for roll it does virtually nothing, so you have to activate RCS for that. That's no problem though, because I have so much RCS fuel on this thing that you have more than enough for the purpose. So it's designed so it has enough RCS fuel to where you can move it as much as you need to and also dock with it. And then if you need to refuel RCS tanks on a ship, it has enough for that too. All right, and it is way ahead of us, so it needs to be moving faster than we are. So what that means is I'm just gonna have to grow our periapsis and apoapsis out a little bit more, so that way we can catch up to it. Or it can catch up to us. And then we'll move to overtake it. Alright, so that'll work right there. When your intercept nodes go on top of each other, that's what you like to see, because then they're going to happen at the same time every time, and now this will tick down up to this point, and then once it overtakes us, we're going to move in and intercept it there. So asymmetric or non-circular orbit is what you want for that, because then we only have to slow down here, and we don't have to worry about two different burns, if that makes any sense. So I'm just going to pause it now, and then I'll resume after we've caught up, because this is the max speed that I can go here is 4 times, so this is going to take a lot of orbits for it to get around all the way, but that's fine, just so you can kind of see what I mean here. So this little ship here has to get all the way up to that point, and then the ship has to go all the way to that point, but I do kind of want to see one orbit here just to see how long I have to wait. One way to prevent you from waiting long times is to just simply grow your apoapsis out more, because then you're going to slow down even more as you come around that orbit. So yeah, it moved a little bit, which is fine when you're down closer to here. If you don't want to, if you're not patient, then you can grow it out more and just wait and then burn back in. But I like to be more accurate than that. So this thing has, this much fuel. So that's not actually a whole lot. All of these tanks here in the center are full, as long as this spare one up here. But as far as all of these go, they're, just barely there. But I think I'm gonna keep, I'm gonna keep all these tanks on here, because they do have RCS jets on all of them, which is gonna make it a little easier for me to dock than if I were to transfer fuel and from 2 tanks into the 2 other tanks and then eject them. So I'm just gonna keep it the way it is right now. They do have thermoelectric generators and solar panels here, so this thing is never going to run out of power, so we don't have to worry about that. So yeah, I'm just going to go and clean the debris and let this thing orbit. One way to speed it up, actually, even more, if you really wanted to, is just to go down to Kerbal, and then you can watch the orbits if you have like something else on a pad. So if you roll a plane out onto the runway and then hit the brakes and then speed up time warp, you can speed up time warp to maximum with the plane on the ground, and you don't have to wait for this if you really don't want to. So if you know how many orbits it's going to take and how many minutes, and you can speed it up to that exact minute time and then go back to the space center and fly your ship that way. But it's really not all that bad, so I'm just gonna wait it out, but I'll bring you guys in once it's ready. Alright, so here we're back. We have our intercept is about as close as it's going to get here at 9.2 kilometers, and that is good enough for our purposes. So I'm just going to go ahead and start burning towards it. Now, this thing is going to move insanely fast because we have all of these rockets that are still active. So you're going to be using the power of 5 of these 1500 power rocket engines. So you want to be a little careful about not exceeding, beyond 100 meters a second, probably is a good rule of thumb. But we'll be fine. At least we should be fine. And again, you just want to try to keep that little green retrograde marker on the sort of anti-target marker. I guess it would be the opposite of your target. And it's going to move as you get closer, so you just kind of want to do that right there and just push it towards your target as much as possible by just burning in like the opposite direction that it's moving. And at 2.3 kilometers, you load in any model, so keep that in mind. Alright, so right now I'm just trying to rotate the ship as best I can to match the translation controls. So right now I'm pressing J so I can move over to the left. And then RCS is just going to tend to fire automatically on its own, so be prepared for that. Alright, so the problem here is the Papa Dragon is actually tilted, and that is what is causing the issue. And drifting off into outer space. So I think what happened is I may have accidentally hit it at some point when I tried to first dock it. So hopefully it's still on there. I might actually be able to just dock it right here. Looks like it is. Hey, there we go. So I didn't have. Yeah, so I didn't have to do too much there, which is actually nice. I do apologize about any pauses with what I'm saying, because these stupid microphones like to shut themselves off whenever there is no audio going into them. And since it's just me talking, that doesn't qualify. But whatever. Alright, so I'm not entirely sure. Alright, so it looks like these still have fuel, which is good. So that means that the entire center tank still has fuel in it, which is just fine. So what's going to wind up happening is we're going to have to transfer all the fuel out of these 4 tanks down here into as many tanks as we can up there in the main ship. So that's going to take a while, but there you go. I did manage to dock these super massive payloads, which is very nice. And it looks like they're staying together too. So we did have enough fuel in that tank actually to transfer all the way into the gray tank, which was good. This thing might flex a lot when you have it docked like this, but as long as you don't move it, it should be fine. If it starts to oscillate, you can always hit time warp to stop any sort of oscillation. But there you go. So I'm going to refuel this, and I'm going to do a bunch of refueling missions up here so I can get this ship fully refueled, and then I will resume it back when I have the new fuel tank up here, our spare tank for when we actually get ready to launch out to Moho. So I'm going to do one launch of that and one dock of that, and then I'm going to have to do an additional one there. So I'll bring you back in when we're ready for that. Alright, so here we are, we're back. I got this thing completely refueled, so every single one of these tanks has max fuel now after several refueling missions. And here on the back, I didn't want to film the launch and dock of this thing because it just take too long. But it's the same process. So basically, this is the spare tank that I can put on here, and you can dock 2 of these things together, or you can put another attachment craft up on top of this with this larger docking port, and then it has a smaller docking port on the bottom, so it can flip around and it can attach whichever way you want it onto your craft. But this is going to be our tank that's going to power our nuclear engines once all of this other fuel runs out. So now the craft is going to run off of the central engine right here, and all of these other ones are going to be offline because we don't need those anymore, because this thing is already all the way in space. I did disable all of the RCS except for this tank, because this is ultimately going to be the one that we detach and just send away. Here you can see another piece of the debris of the spare tank right there from when it got into orbit. You can stack these things as well, one on top of the other, and just keep going, but keep in mind that the more you do stack something and the longer a vessel gets, the more unstable it's going to be, because it's going to jostle around and it might decouple. you can actually rip a decouple node off of another decouple node if you put too much force on one. Like if you have rockets attached to one and you fire them at full strength, then you might rip a couple pieces apart. So right now I'm just going to orient it to our prograde marker here and figure out how we're going to do our burn out to Moho, because this is another Moho mission. I'm going to go rescue Jeb later. Getting off of Eve is really quite a pain. Not impossible, but it's a pain. Especially because other planets don't have oxygen atmosphere, so air intake engines do not work on a planet like Eve. Alright, so we want to go to Moho. So that's our target. And let's see. Probably going to want to burn somewhere around here so it ejects us out that way. So I'm just going to time warp up until we get to about that point. And right here is good. Good as any. And when I brought it back in, you saw how I did my docking situation. I have this thing aimed at perfect anti-normal, and then bring all the craft up from below it and attach them vertically instead of doing a horizontal dock, and that way is just easier. I do want to do this kind of slow and without the use of RCS, because you can already see this spare tank right here is jostling around as we move. Now, if this were attached to a large docking port, then probably wouldn't have this problem, because there is more structural stability with the larger ones, but they do tend to glitch out and get state locked, so you can't dock them together every now and again. But there we go, just hit time warp to stop all the movement, and that seems to have worked. So let's go ahead and fire this engine and see what happens here. Alright, so I'm just gonna do some periapsis burns with just this main engine here. And as you can see, it's working as intended. All of these other ones here still have full fuel and they're all shut down, and it's using fuel from these outer tanks first, and it's doing it symmetrically. So once all these outer tanks are done, I can eject them here, and all the staging is already still set up from when we first launched. So that's the plan. I'm going to pause it here, and I'm just going to do the standard orbit and burn only at periapsis so we get the maximum effect of the Oberth effect, or whatever the hell that's called, and escape from Kerbin, and we should have a lot of fuel in order to do this. So that's a plan. I'll bring you guys back in after I have escaped Kerbin, and I'll do the inclination burn. So here we go. Alright, so here we are, and I have just ejected that first stage right there that you see it's floating away. So this is the end of the burn. I have nipped into this fuel tank just a little bit there, but I think both of these are full. Yep, all those are still full. So pretty much all these fuel tanks are completely full except for that one, which I've started using. Disabled fuel cross feed on everything, so that way I'm only using fuel from those tanks. And there is our uh, escape from Kerbin, as you can see right there. So I'm going to go ahead and clean up that debris just so I don't run into it at any point in time. And yeah, so that worked out pretty good. We have a lot of fuel still to go all the way to Moho, and our next step is to do our inclination burn out here, which Moho has, I think, the largest inclination of any of the planets at 7.0. Yeah, so there we go, and that's about 1,200 meters per second. But that's nothing because we have plenty of fuel, and we've just ejected a little portion of our weight. So again, the other option that you have with this craft, instead of using the single 1,500 power rocket, is you could then activate all of these four nuclear engines on here and just run them instead of running all the fuel from these for this rocket. But with this setup, you don't have to do that because all this fuel is dedicated to this 1,500 power, and then once all this lower stage gets ejected, our center mass is then going to be here, and then all the fuel from this spare tank that we have is going to go towards these 1,500 power rockets. So many options that you can do with a setup like this. And you don't necessarily have to have this large of a fuel tank on here. I think this might wind up being a little excessive, but that's fine. You could just replace this with any size fuel tank you want, really, and just attach it right here. The whole idea is you can use all of that up and then just simply decouple it, and you have your regular fuel amount, so you can save on fuel by just bringing a spare with you on the way. So I'm gonna pause it again after I do the inclination burn and bring you guys back in for a fuel check. Alright, so the inclination burn is done, and it took all of the next stage and about half the fuel from all of these tanks on this other stage here, but that's fine because I think, like I said, Moho has the highest inclination out of all the planet's orbits, so that's fine. We'll still have plenty of fuel. Now I just have to do the burns to bring our apoapsis and periapsis into Moho's orbit and find our intercept, and I will resume after we have an intercept with Moho. Alright, well, here we are. We have our intercept at Moho finally. We did use up all of the fuel in the launch stage as well as the extra rockets I had on there for the inclination burn, but that's fine because this spare tank has done its job, and I've just been refueling this tank that all of these four feed off of as we go. It's just about done, and once we finally get to do our burn over here at Moho, I believe this will use up the rest of this entire tank. And that is perfect. Alright. I have been using these 4 ion engines on here as well as I've been doing my burns. Right, so I just wanted to get a 250,000 meter orbit around Moho, and then I'm gonna pick my new landing site, because I don't want to land at the same one where we landed there once. Find a different crater. And there we go. Alright, so that's a nice orbit. We landed way down there before. I want to do something more equatorial. I kind of like the look of this crater over here. Although this one over here on this side looks fine as well. Looks like it's a lot less bumpy over here. I think I'm gonna shoot for that one. Alright, so in order to do that, I'm just going to plan a maneuver on the apoapsis. Something about like that. I think I just about missed it. Oh well. There it is. Alright, so there's our orbit. That's good enough for what we need. 250,000 might be a bit high still, so I'm going to bring this down a little closer. Just going to go ahead and get that 100,000 meter orbit, since that'll be good. Alright, there we go. Alright, so that's a remainder of our fuel. We don't need this anymore. So let's undock it. Alright, and now we have to eject these ion engines because we can't use those when we're bringing this craft down to the surface. So sadly, we have to get rid of them. And there they go. They still had a lot of xenon gas inside of them, so you could potentially use these to travel even further, although it would be very slow acceleration. You could still go quite a ways with just those 4 little xenon engines helping you get there and save on fuel, but I chose not to use them because I wanted to test the liquid fuel and see how far we could go on those. But overall, that was successful. So we have finally arrived here at Moho. The next episode, I'm going to do a landing and then get back up here and redock with the main part of the ship. So there we go. Hope you guys liked this little trip to Moho here. I'm gonna align the craft to our retrograde as we need, because I believe what I'm gonna do is just use the power of these nuclear engines to deorbit the orbital altitude here and then undock the lander craft and then use the engines on here to reestablish my orbit. And so that way I don't have to use any of the lander craft's fuel in order for it to land. But if that plan doesn't work, then I can just use the lander craft's fuel. Actually, I want to test the Landercraft's fuel because this thing is capable of getting off the ground on Kerbin with this amount of fuel right here. So if it can do that on Kerbin, it should have no problem on Moho, because that's what it was designed for. So I'm just going to test it out as is and see what happens first before I need to reload. But I'm going to save the game just in case something bad happens, so I can reload it later. But alright. I have an action group set up for all of these nuclear engines so I can deactivate them all and turn them back on with the action group 2. So that's number 2 on the keyboard. Download link for this craft and the refueling ship as well as the spare tank will be in the descriptions, and stay tuned for our next episode. Later.